All right, everybody. My clock shows that it just turned 2, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We want to make the most of this next little block of time because we have so much fantastic stuff to go over. Just wanted to welcome you to the webinar and thank you for joining us. I know that you're a fundraiser and you're busy and your time is really important, but I promise we're going to go over some really fantastic information about how to build your best ever case for support, and hopefully we're going to make your lives a lot easier. Before we get started, let me just introduce myself. My name is Abby, and I'm part of the team over at QGive. We are all about helping nonprofits raise money and helping them raise money well, and so is Diana. So we're very excited to have her here. Just as a quick note, I know that a lot of you on here with us are QGive clients. So if you work with QGive and you have any questions about how you can apply some of today's lessons to your account, let me know. If I can't help you out, I will point you to the person who can. And if you don't work with QGive, no worries at all. Everything here is going to apply to you as well, so you will get as much out of it as everybody else. Just a couple of housekeeping things. I always get this question. I promise we're recording the webinar, and we will send you a copy after the webinar is over. So as a general rule, it takes me a little bit of time to download it, edit it, and get it out to you, but you can look out for a copy of this webinar in your inbox tomorrow or on Monday. If you've got questions, totally feel free to ask them. You can pop them over in the chat box over there, and I'll moderate those questions at the end. And if you are a Twitter person, as I know many of you are, you can follow along with me on the hashtag QWebinar. And there's the QGive handle and Diana's handle, so you can make sure you don't miss anything. With that said, with us today is Diana Hoyt. She is a brilliant resource for fundraisers. She's got more than 30 years of experience in the fundraising industry, so she knows what she's talking about, and she is an encyclopedia of best practices and tips and insights that a lot of us really would like to apply to our own work. I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Diana. You're going to see her screen pop up presently, and I hope you have a notebook ready because she's going to share a ton of fantastic information.
Good morning. Wonderful to have all of you on board. We're going to talk about something today that I love because I don't know how anyone goes out and raises money without this. It's called the case for support, sometimes referred to as case statement, sometimes simply called the case. And so it's really an important document. Now, I do want to make a statement that it is the fourth document in a line of documents that all of you should have. You should have a strategic plan. You should have gift acceptance guidelines. You should have donor recognition policies. And then you should have a case for support. So keep that in mind, that there are things that come before the case, but the case is critical. I found this statement back in 1994, and it so clearly defines what we're talking about that I'm going to read it to you, even though I know all of you can read, because I love the sound of it. It states, as clearly and persuasively as possible, your case statement lays out your history, purpose, and plans. But more importantly, it presents the reasons why someone should invest in your organization and the benefits that will result from that investment. And I love that statement. Now, Abby said we're going to talk about some things seriously. So you're probably wondering, why a stack of Oreo cookies? You see that white gooey stuff, the frosting that holds the two cookies together? Well, that's your case for support. That gooey stuff that as a kid you like to eat and sometimes never ate the two chocolate cookies. The case for support is sandwiched between your strategic plan and your fundraising plan. It's kind of the glue, if you like, or in this case, frosting, that holds the two together. Okay, so why does a case matter? It matters because it establishes credibility with your stakeholders. Your stakeholders see you raising money for a purpose that benefits the community and benefits them. And that's really important. If you're thinking about donor-centered fundraising, the case needs for the stakeholders to see themselves. It also creates a consistent message. Everyone is singing the same note. You have a much greater chance of being heard and therefore being successful if people out in the community hear all of your stakeholders, your staff, your board, your volunteers, your other donors, all saying the same thing about you. So that's one of the things that a case does, is it really helps you establish that consistent message, which is really important. Okay, who writes it? The Chief Development Officer is usually my preference. That's the person who should be writing it. But some of you are with organizations that don't have a Chief Development Officer. So it falls on the shoulders of the Executive Director. Okay, so my preference is always one of those two people, but it may be somebody else in your office. But that's where you want to begin. It should have input from other staff, from the board of directors, from the volunteers. When I would write a case for support, I would sometimes walk around and talk to other people, getting their input before I completely finished writing the document. And you should test it. And I'm going to talk about testing later. I'm not going to talk about it right now. We will get back to that. So what is a case? It is a written document. That's important. It is a written document. It presents the compelling reasons why your organization deserves support and the urgent needs that support will meet. And I'm going to reiterate that over and over again. So the case answers the question, why? Why should anybody support your organization? Why should they single you out for financial support? Okay, a couple of special notes I want to make right now. When you finish writing your case, when you think you've done the best job you can, and it's ready to go public, you should have board approval. This requires the board approving it. Now, why would you want that? First of all, we're getting back to that everybody singing on the same note. It is absolutely critical that all of your board members understand what your case for support is and what you're trying to accomplish, because they are your key public face out there in the community, and you really want them to understand what you're doing. Second is that it should fall into the framework of 3 to 7 pages. I like 3 to 5, but some people are a little more verbose and they might push it up to the 7. I've also seen case statements that are perfectly good that were only 1 or 2 pages. So don't think you have to get to that 3. 1 page is fine if that does the job. That 7 is your max. Nobody's going to read it if you get beyond that. And that's kind of why I like the 3 to 5. Most people are going to read a 3-page document. But notice that includes pictures, graphs, quotes, white space. White space is important. You do not want a solid page of writing. You need to break it up. Bullet points are wonderful because you want it to be an extremely readable document. Okay, so when do you write a case? Well, if you're going to write an appeal letter, you should have a case for support, because the appeal, what you're asking for, needs to come out of the case for support. If you're going to write grants, you never write a grant that is not based upon your case for support. So that case is your primary document for doing an appeal, for writing grants. I love a case statement when I go out to recruit new board members. If you can sit down with somebody you want to recruit for your board and you hand them that case for support and they can see what you're doing, who you are, what you're doing, where you're going, and what your needs are, that's exciting for them because they feel like, okay, I'm joining a board or being considered for a board that is really serious about what it's doing. Okay. And you should write a case if you're really serious about raising money. If you're just going to go do another golf tournament or send out another direct mail appeal just because that's what you always do, then you probably don't need a case for support. But if you're serious about your fundraising program, then you really do need a case for support. Now, back again to the why. Why do you want to write it? It's going to build consensus and commitment among the primary stakeholders. Everybody's agreed this is what we're doing. It's going to provide that clear and consistent message. You know, when you get something down on paper and everybody can read it and it's only, 3 to 5 pages, people can get excited about that and everybody is reading the same thing. Like I said earlier, it helps recruit board members. It's also good for recruiting volunteers. So it's a great document to do lots of things for your organization. It also encourages donor cultivation. Again, when some of your donors get an opportunity to read this document, they understand where you're going. They feel like they're part of the team. You're bringing them in to the inside. They're not staying on the outside of the organization. And it does provide that basis for all forms of communication, brochures, appeals. If you're sending out an email, the basis of that information should come out of your case for support, other social media, grants, as I mentioned earlier. So that's really the why. It is your communication document between you, all the stakeholders, and everyone you want to communicate with out in your community. And no matter how large that community is for your organization. Now, a case for support has 4 primary segments because we've already discussed the who, the what, the when, the why. So this is the how. These are the 4 segments that you need to consider when you are writing that case for support. So starting with the introduction, you're going to do a brief history. Now, I realize some of you on this call are maybe a couple, 3 years old. Some of your organizations may be 50 to 100 years old. So for those of you who are older, writing that history can be tough. And I've worked for older organizations, and getting it down to a brief history of a couple of paragraphs is sometimes difficult. This is where you really need to be a good wordsmith. Get your mission in there. What is the mission of your organization? Do you have any major accomplishments? Has your organization been recognized? Have you received any awards? And some of your accomplishments might be that over the course of the last 5 years, we've served 5,000 families. We've helped 1,000 children. We have saved this many whales. Whatever it is, you want to get that information into your introduction. And why are you unique? What makes your animal shelter different from the animal shelter on the other side of town? What makes your family services different? Your behavioral health services, your school. Why are you unique? What makes you special? And it's okay to brag. It's okay to do that. Now, this is the tough part. Your introduction should probably be no more than half a page. And some of you are going, that's not possible. Yeah, it is. You just have to get your points very succinct in writing this. Because remember, if your whole document is going to be no more than 3 to 5 pages, max 7, you figure out how long this can be. Maybe for some of you, you're going, okay, we're doing 5 pages. I can take the whole front page to get my introduction. Okay, next section, current programs and activities. What do you do? What are you doing right now? What works for you? What kind of programs? And again, this can be tough. I worked for a behavioral health organization. We had 7 distinct programs. There is a very different program from having a child therapy program to having an AIDS program. And how did I get all of that done? Boy, very succinctly. So you want to tell everyone what you are currently doing. Who do you serve? Do you only serve young children? Do you only serve families? Do you only serve women? Do you only serve women with children? Do you only serve puppies and cats? And you don't serve horses. So who do you serve, no matter what that entity, animal, human is? And in what geographic area do you serve? Some of you are bound by city limits. Some of you are bound by counties. Some by state, region, nationally. Some of you are international. You need to be very specific about what do you do, who do you serve, and what geographic area do you serve. So somebody reading it understands where you are right now, because that sets the basis for the next section of the case for support. So the next section is going to talk about your vision. What problem or problems do you plan to solve? What are the unmet needs in your geographic area that you're going to reach out to solve? So you may be an organization that works with homeless families, and you have found a need of homeless youth who don't have families. And that's a major problem. I know I'm in Phoenix, Arizona. On any given day, we have 5,000 teenagers living on the street. That's a major problem. And that's it. They have an unmet need. There aren't a lot of shelters for just youth. And so that would be a problem to be solved. So what is your problem in your community that needs to be solved? And you've already stated these are the kinds of programs we're doing. So how are we going to do that? So what makes you uniquely capable of solving this problem? Again, going back to your current programs, because we already provide shelter for families, we can work toward providing shelter for youth who have no families. Because there's not enough need being met in our community. And how will solving this problem change and benefit people's lives? So we're talking about the youth. How are you going to change their lives? Talking about the community. You're going to have all these teenagers off the street. How about the donors? How is it going to make their lives better? Well, they're going to feel safer because you have teenagers who are not going to be doing drugs. They're not going to be burglarizing, etc. Okay. So again, your vision needs to define the problem, what makes you capable of solving this problem, and how will solving this problem benefit other people's lives, the community, and your donors. And then your fourth section is the action plan. How do you plan on solving this problem? What is it going to take? Okay. We know what you already do. You've defined the problem. How are you going to solve it? So that needs to be very clearly written out. And again, because you don't have a lot of space, being succinct, being a good wordsmith, This is where you might want to use a lot of flowery language. You don't get to do that. You know, your adjectives are going to have to be very tight, and they're going to have to clearly define what you're trying to do. The action plan needs to include very specific, quantifiable objectives. So, in other words, it's got to be measurable. Absolutely has to be measurable. So, you may say, we realize there is this huge problem 5,000 youth on the street on any given day. And our goal for this year is to have 200 of them in appropriate housing, receiving appropriate services, and getting them back into school. Okay. But we can only manage 200 this year. And that's not a lot, but it's a step in the right direction. Okay. So again, I'm being very specific. Teenage youth, 200 of them, and these are the services we're going to try to provide for them. So what are you going to need to do it? So again, we're defining everything. How much money are you going to need? Are you going to need to hire more staff? Other resources? Well, we're going to need housing. We're probably going to need a behavioral health therapist. We're going to need to look for resources for things like clothing, food stamps, school supplies. So again, we're going to define everything that we're going to need in order to reach out into the community. Does this begin to hopefully give you some ideas? 4 sections, 3 to 7 pages, 7 max, clearly defined and consistent. Now, the action plan also needs a timetable. Even though you may get ahead of your timetable or you may fall behind, people reading it want to know, how long is this going to take you? That we hope within the first 60 days to begin identifying youth, to identify housing, to do this, etc. So have that timeline. Is it going to take you 12 months? Is it going to take you 18 months? Okay. One of the things I didn't put in here, which I just crossed my mind, was how are you going to measure success? One of my clients is working with homeless women, and they've started a brand new program with the goal of getting homeless women, and these are just women without families, getting them into housing, getting them through an educational program, getting them into a job. And they're measuring success based upon the initial women that came into the program, and there were 15, and already within, I believe, 9 months, they have 3 women in housing with jobs, making a living where they can support themselves. So these women are no longer on food stamps. So it's been a transition. And so their goal is to get all 15 women to that point. And of course, they did a lot of screening. Did the women have certain skills so they could begin moving them through that program? What was their literacy? Okay. If they had women that didn't have literacy, they had to move them into a literacy program. So again, it's what's your timetable and how are you measuring everything? How are you going to raise the money? I worked with a client on writing their case for support. And when they wrote their case, this was a volunteer organization. They had never had staff, but in order to continue the program, they really needed to hire an executive director, a director to move the program forward. And when we wrote their case for support, their initial draft was to raise enough money to pay the director's salary for the first year. And I said, no. You want to put into your case for support that you want to raise enough money to pay that director's salary for 3 years. Otherwise, at the end of the first year, you're back trying to raise money for the second year. If you get enough money for 3 years, at the end of the first year, you can start raising money for year 4. And at the end of year 2, you're raising money for year 5. So you're always sure of having enough money to keep that executive director in that role. And your donors need to see that you're looking out 3 years. Don't narrow it down to 1 year. Okay, so we were very specific that we were raising money to move forward beyond that first year. And that gave people confidence that this program wasn't just going to be a 1-year executive director. You also, in your action plan, want donors to see, when you talk about how you're raising money, they want to see themselves. So again, this organization had said, well, we're going to go raise money from foundations. And I said, again, no. You want to raise money from foundations, but also corporations. Part of their, and without telling a whole lot about this organization, but it had to do with employment through a particular type of corporation. These are all tech companies. And I said, you need to be able to go back to those tech companies and raise money from them, and also some from private individuals within your community. So we expanded their fundraising from just looking at foundation grants to also looking at corporations and individuals. They were not going to be an organization that was going to be doing a special event. Maybe down the road in 2 or 3 years, but event fundraising was really not part of their action plan. But again, always having those donors see. And we wanted to be able to take this case to some of these tech companies so they could see what the issues were and see themselves as being part of the solution through financial support. You always want to make the case resonate. A key to this is the donor who reads this, be it your board member or a prospective board member or someone else, will always see themselves as part of the solution. Okay. Now, I mentioned earlier about testing the case for support. When I was a freshly minted Chief Development Officer, and I was writing my first case for support, and of course I kind of leaned on some of the more senior people in the field and talked about, writing my first case for support and what I was doing. And a couple of them said to me, test it. And I said, what? How do I test it? And they said, you are going to send it out and find out how people respond. And so the suggestion was, and I took them up on it, and there's no, by the way, I don't have a slide. I'm just talking to you at this point. They said, send it out to 5 donors to your organization, and send it out to 5 people in your community who are not donors, but you wish they were. So I'll only send it out to 10 people. And you want to do this with individuals. So 5 donors, and I think I had 1 or 2 board members on that list, and 5 non-donors. And I simply said with the case statement, I said, we're writing a new case for support of where our organization is headed this next year. What we consider is a need in the community that needs to be addressed. This case statement talks about who we are, what we do, what we want to do, and how we plan on making it happen. We'd love your feedback. Do you feel that this is important to the community, and is it something that you would see yourself supporting? I'm going to call you in a few days to talk to you about it, because I'd love to hear your responses. Before I could make those 10 phone calls, 2 of them sent me checks saying, I think you're on the right track. This is important to our community, and I want to support it. One of those checks, by the way, came from an existing donor, and one came from a non-donor. I called the rest of them and got some good feedback. They all felt that it was important, and I felt comfortable now taking it to the board and getting their full approval to begin using this as a case for support. So I actually did the test prior to board approval because I wanted to, if I needed any feedback, I wanted to get that into the case before I went for board approval. And by the way, this was all done with my executive director's knowledge. I didn't go just a little crazy and do this all on my own. But when you're testing the case, these are some of the things that you want to find out. What was appealing about the case? What did they like? What resonated? What didn't they like? Because they may have saw something that they didn't think worked. How did the case make them feel? Did it make them feel hopeful? Did they make them feel good about our organization and where we were headed? What did they find surprising? Did they read something in there that they, wow, I didn't know they did that? You're looking for some of those wows. What was interesting? And also, did it create a sense of urgency? This needs to be done. This is important. Not desperation. Not, oh my gosh, the ship is sinking. We need your help. This is about an urgent need. This is about making a difference in the community. So did they sense that? And would it motivate them to give? Now, obviously, when I did the test, it motivated 2 of them to give immediately before they even talked to me. And by the way, I did have more conversations with them. But so, that's something you want to know. Or is there something that maybe I needed to do differently? This, I'm going to tell you, personally, I was scared to death to do this. I didn't want to get totally blown out of the water before I ever even really got started. But I felt good about it and knew that this was something that I needed to consider for the future. And I would encourage you, as scary as it might be, give it a try. And if you don't want to send it out to strangers, if you want to keep it within house, that's okay. But I think sometimes it's interesting to see what people have to say that are out there on the periphery of your organization that you'd truly like to bring in. Okay? So, some thoughts. Developing the case. It is based upon having an organizational strategic plan in place. I have been in the position of having to write a case for support when there was no strategic plan. In fact, there wasn't even a plan to have a strategic plan. So I'm going to tell you, you can do it. It's a little bit harder. You need to talk to key program staff, board members, volunteers, get a sense of direction, because that's what a case for support does, is it gives you a sense of direction in terms of why you're going to go out and raise money. Okay, so you don't have to have it, but imagine your Oreo cookie without both of the cookies. Okay, because that's what you're kind of working from. It's going to help clarify your fundraising priorities. So you know what you're really going out and raising money for. You are not raising money to fill in the gap of expenses. You're raising money for a reason. It does, again, I can't say this enough, it's going to clarify understandings. Everybody's going to be singing the same note. And again, you're securing agreement. Everybody is agreeing. This is where the organization is headed. It focuses everyone's thinking around the organization's mission. It's going to tell your story. Remember, we started off with your history. what you do. Okay, so your story gets told. By the way, one case for support, which was one of the most fun ones that well, it was fun in how it turned out. The beginning story, rather than jumping right into the history, we told a very brief 3-line story, and the story went something like this. Imagine you're Susie. You're going off to school. You've never seen a book. You've never had a story read to you. All of a sudden, are some of you going, wow, that few sentences, few words is going to grab somebody's attention. What if you're Susie? And then we went on from that point that this is what the organization does. It helps kids who've never seen a book have a book. Okay. So your history can start off with an absolute grabber at the very beginning. Okay. Because that's how we led into our history and why we even existed as an organization. Again, creates a sense of urgency, not of desperation. It tells the reader what you want them to do, how you want them to support your organization. Okay? Now, I'm going to try to do something that I have done before, so I'm going to hope that we kind of all hang in here. I want to show you a couple of examples of some things. A couple of them are case statements. These are kind of old, but if everybody will just kind of hang with me, I'm going to jump out of my PowerPoint. So you get to see me pop around in here a little bit. Okay. This was done for a school district. I was actually a foundation for a school district. I think it was a little bit more brief than I would have liked, but she started off with her logo, and she started off, this is an educational foundation that gives money, little grants, mini grants, to teachers in their classrooms to do something special. So, I mean, they're small grants. It was like $500, $1,000, but it was enough money for a teacher to go do something. Okay. And this was a quote from one of the teachers who'd been a recipient. One of the things, too, that I liked about this was part of their showing the need was they were showing what the budget looked like back in 2007 and what it looked like in 2012. So that people could see the distinction in terms of their funding, where their funding was coming from, and why it was cut. And then she also had another, when she got to the solution, had another quote from a teacher. Nice use of bullet points. It just like pop, pop, pop. It's a lot easier for people to read bullet points and to get a point across rather than using a paragraph. And she closed. I had another quote. She used a lot of quotes, a lot of bullet points, but it was good because the quotes told the story. This is what happened. I got the money. This is what happened. And so people could see where the money was going to go. This one, not one of my favorites, except this actually showed some good points about where the money was going. This was for a Ronald McDonald House. This is one of the things I always show this one, is because it showed, rather than saying, oh, we're in all these counties, we're in this many counties, they showed graphically the counties themselves and where people were coming from. So you could see that there had been 26, if you lived in that county, you would see that 26 people had been served. And I thought that was a really nice way of demonstrating that. They were actually doing a capital campaign and were showing, where the campaign goal was going. It was very clearly laid out. So some of you that may be something you want to think about. This one, let me show this one. I like this one. This organization, I never liked their logo. It was really too hard to see. But one of the things they did is they explained their services. They used pictures so somebody could actually see that. Again, great use of bullet points to show what they were doing. Opportunities for volunteers. This was their future challenges and aspirations. And at the very end, they had a great group picture of some of their staff and the clients that they served. This was an organization that worked with people with disabilities. And there was a nice group shot. So that was good. So those are kind of some of the things. Gosh, I don't remember what this one was. This was a school. This one we had to get a copy of. Actually, funny, the first time I ever did this workshop on case statement, somebody was on the call who actually went to this school, which was just kind of, talk about serendipitous. But again, nicely laid out. There's their history. This is their experience, what they've done. There was a photograph here which we could not use. What their future is. Again, they used another photograph that we weren't able to use. But there's their opportunities and what they were going to try to accomplish. So, again, using bullet points, using pictures, none of these are beyond that 3 to 5 pages. And you'll see a lot of white space. Photographs always help with white space. So those are some of the things that you want to consider as you are doing this. Now, one of the offers, and Abby's probably going to think that I'm crazy, but I do make every time I teach this class, is if you write a case for support and you would like a pair of eyes to read it, I would be happy to do that. So anybody on this call who wants to send me their case for support can do that. And my email address is Diana, Diana, at MatchMakerFRS.com. You can see my website. I will not read anything that's more than 7 pages. So if you did more than 7 pages, don't send it to me. I don't even want to see it. But anything up to that, I'm willing to read. I will warn you. This is a little bit of a warning. I love to read case statements, by the way. I think it's so cool. But my original career, I was a high school math teacher. So I can be, I'm going to read it from a point of view of being consistent, being accurate, etc. A little word of warning, and I should probably someday put this in the slide. When you are writing a case for support, you are writing it for the organization. So let's say you're XYZ organization. When you say, we did this, don't say we, don't say our, don't use personal pronouns. You want to use things like, over the past 3 decades, XYZ organization did this. It's not we did this, it's the organization did this. So be really careful about that type of terminology. Okay? Same thing if you're writing a grant. You don't use we, or shouldn't. You want to talk about the organization and its accomplishments. Okay. Questions, Abby? I'm going back to you.
Awesome. First off, this was so delightfully laid out. And everybody, I know she mentioned if you want to follow up with your input or with your case study, I think that would be fantastic. And your last comment about writing about your organization in the third person did bring up a couple of questions. So,
okay,
to what extent do you include calls to action about getting involved or volunteering or donating or anything in your case for support, or do you use your case for support to back up requests that you make in the future?
You can, in the very end of, when you're writing that last portion with your action plan, and you can state, we will be reaching out, or I shouldn't say we, I'm sorry, I just did it myself. It's a bad habit. You should say XYZ organization is going to be reaching out into the community seeking support and volunteers. If you have an interest, call this number or email this person. So you can kind of put that call to action, but it's going to go at the end of your action plan, because they need to see that you have a plan, and the plan isn't them. That the plan is, we're going to do all this stuff. This is our timetable. But man, if you want to be on board with this, here's how you can do it.
That's a very interesting point, especially because I know there's so much talk in the nonprofit world about writing donor-centric content and focusing more on the donor's experiences than on the kind of accolades of the nonprofit. It's really interesting to look at how to write this document that's kind of an internal document that occasionally is seen out by donors and volunteers. Do you use this as a basis for other appeals? So you would use this as a reference when writing an appeal?
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Yeah. Because if in your case for support, you say that, it's urgent that we identify 200 youth and have them go through this program and be able to make them self-sufficient, then when you write that appeal, some of that language for that appeal letter is going to come right out of your case for support.
Perfect.
I mean, they need to be in alignment. Otherwise, if you say, well, we're going to go out and raise money for veterans, and by the way, I'm all for veterans, but wait a minute, your case for support said teenage youth. It didn't say veterans.
True. Okay.
So they've got to align.
Perfect. That makes a lot of sense. This is kind of another question that came up. Do you want to have a different case for support for individual campaigns, or do you encourage nonprofits to kind of write one guiding case for support?
Okay, that is an excellent question. I think every organization should have a overriding case for support. Then, if you are doing a specific campaign, and we're going to go back to my teenage kids, that if that is just a piece of 3 things that you're going to be doing that are in your case for support, you might write a separate case for support for that youth program. Okay. But it still aligns back to the umbrella case for support. Okay? Because again, you want to show consistency of message. You want to show this is what we're doing. So you might, in your case for support, say we're going to do this, help youth who are living on the streets. We're going to have a separate program for veterans living on the streets, and we're doing another program for women with children. So we have these 3 programs that are under our umbrella. And then if you want to have a separate case for support for each of those 3 programs, that most often happens, and that's a perfectly good thing to do. It most often happens when you are doing a capital campaign or an endowment campaign. So here is our overall case, and we're doing this capital campaign for a building. And you're going to have a separate case for support for that building campaign.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense, especially since we want to keep it to a minimum of pages.
Right.
So
right.
I'm sure that's very helpful that way.
Yeah.
I just got another question from Mike, and Mike asks, if your goals kind of exceed your accomplishments, maybe if you're a newer organization or you're kind of branching out into an area in which you haven't previously operated, how do you frame that kind of situation to get support to achieve these goals if maybe you haven't bulked out your accomplishments section?
I think you just be very honest and don't beat around the bush. Just say, this is where we've been, but we see this need in the community. We believe we're qualified to fulfill that need, and this is why and how we're going to do it. In other words, just lay it out. Just say, you know what? This is different for us, but because of what we're currently doing, we believe we are qualified. And you know, it's like going in for a job interview. You're going to tell them, you know, this is new to me, but I'm qualified to do this because of these things. You know, maybe you have a staff person. Maybe you have some other type of expertise that is going to allow you to be able to move forward. So, yeah, work from your strength. You know, just tell them this is our strength and this is why we think we can do it.
Perfect. That makes so much sense. And I know I see a few people on here that are with newer organizations, and I think that's very reassuring. If you can focus more on your strengths and things that you can do instead of things that you have done in the past, you can make a really great case for support that way.
Yeah.
And the last question I actually have, I've gotten a few requests for you to repeat your email address. It looks like people are eager to email you.
Okay, it is Diana, DIANA, at MatchMaker FRS. That's FrankRabbitSam.com.
And if anybody missed it, I'll make sure to include it in the follow-up email that I'll send you with the recording of the webinar. And with that, Diana, do you have any little last parting words you want to give people? I know you've got a captive audience. People are very excited to hear what you have to say.
Well, you know, I think if you just go out and buy a bag of Oreo cookies and sit down and write that case for support, you're going to be in good shape. And if the Oreo cookies help, I mean, they may remind you, I'm working on the frosting.
Well, that is a beautiful parting word. I have never been so excited to get off the phone and go get Oreos. Everybody, Diana has given us a ton of great information. I'll make sure that you get her information in the follow-up email. You'll have this recording in your inbox in a couple of days. So go get some cookies, sit down, and get started writing a case for support. You've got a ton of great info in this webinar, and you've got some people in your corner who are willing to help you kind of tweak it and perfect it. Keep an eye out for that email. It'll be coming to you within the next couple of days. I'll also let you know about future webinars. So we've got a cool lineup over the next several weeks. Diana, thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise with us. It was an amazing presentation.
Thank you. My pleasure. Everyone have a great day.
All right. Have a good afternoon. All right. Bye.